Hello and welcome to episode 46 of Podcast Demastered. I'm your host, Ethan Meyer, and I'm joined, as always, by my two very good friends, Chelsea and Wade. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking adaptations, book to film adaptations. We're kind of opening it up. We're going to talk about graphic novels, maybe comic books. I don't know. But essentially just anything that's that started out in like written form and was adapted to the big screen. So
I almost feel like this episode's been a long time coming, don't you all?
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
it's definitely it's definitely one that's fun to talk about because there are so many adaptations out there, from very popular like blockbuster series to even just like indie darlings. So, and there's a lot of stuff that people don't even realize that's been adapted. Like, they didn't know that this movie that they like actually had a book, So there's probably a lot of people out there that their favorite movie, they have no idea that there was actually like a novelization of it. So, and not like, there's this in
the fact
there's this scenario, but in reverse, where like movies get novelized, if that's a word, after the fact. Most Star Wars stuff is like that. We're not talking that. We're talking the OG translation. So, so before we get into some of our ones that we like and ones we don't like, I say we kind of just go around and talk about what each of us sort of looks for in an adaptation. Like, if we know a film's coming out that's based on a book, especially if it's a book that we like or we've read, what are our expectations for that film? What makes it a good adaptation? What makes it a bad adaptation? Is there any gray area? So a lot of things to discuss. I'll kind of open it up here with Wade. What do you look for in an adaptation?
Man, it kind of just depends on what it is. Like, because a lot of the stuff that I prefer is more like fantasy, like sci-fi, kind of unrealistic things. In which case they tend to be like series, like book series and stuff like that. And for me, it's more just kind of depends on whether or not like the movie or show or whatever it might be has like on whether or not it showcases like the heart of the series. Like, I don't need things to be the exact same as in the book, as long as it seems realistic for the characters and it's not like obviously problematic for what I know is to come later down the line.
Right. When you say realistic for the characters, does it ever bother you when it finally gets to like the film version and the characters are just not what you thought they should look like or even described as in the book? Like, let's say a character is described in the book with glasses and like short black hair, and then the film version he has like long blonde hair. You know what I mean? Like, does that stuff bother you even if they act the exact same way and have the same turmoil and story arc, but they just look totally different? Does that set you off?
It just kind of depends on what the difference is. I'm pretty flexible with like the physical representation of the characters. Like, if it's just little things here and there, it's like, yeah, but they're still the character. As long as they're still behaving like the character.
Right.
Nothing really springs to mind as a good example of things that I didn't mind versus things that I was like, what the hell were you thinking?
Do you have an example of an adaptation that was pretty fast and loose with the source material, but still was good for like your enjoyment?
If it counts, Scott Pilgrim.
I mean, sure, yeah.
It's a graphic novel, but
yeah, it's an adaptation.
Uh-huh.
It has source material, so
right. Like, most of the characters are pretty much the same. Scott Pilgrim in the book is a little different because in the movie he's just Michael Cera. They're like, here, you're gonna play yourself with like a few little tweaks, but they still did a good job of of keeping like the premise of why are these things a problem.
Yeah.
They kept them all the same, so it was fine.
I think, speaking of Scott Pilgrim, I think one of the things that I liked about that as an adaptation is I think what they were able to achieve with like the visual flair was sort of like a nice homage to the fact that it was a graphic novel. You know what I mean?
Oh
Like
yeah,
that
they brought
film,
that stuff over splendidly.
yeah, like I think that kind of helped to give it that to give the source material some credit, you know. Because if it was just like a standard film and it didn't have all those flourishes, I think it would have been not as enjoyable and not
Oh
as
god.
true to
Yeah.
the
Like if it
material.
was just the story being told without all the
Yeah,
cool like
yeah,
references and callbacks and things. Oh god, that movie would have been awful.
yeah. It just would have been very. It would have been like very mundane and very just like, oh wow,
Yeah.
this is just
Yeah.
cashing in on an IP without actually understanding or respecting it. Chelsea, what about you?
Yeah, this is such a difficult question because I feel like my answer like contradicts itself because I think honestly like book to film adaptations are such a difficult thing to do well, to accomplish just because I think everybody has their own idea of what they expect. Like especially those who are big fans of any types of like, just standalone books or even series. Everybody has their idea of how things should be. And in my ideal world, yes, I would totally like a one-to-one representation. I just want that book because I like the book for a particular reason. So therefore, like, I just want to see that entire world, all those characters just come to life completely as
Right.
on screen. But that's never really happens, and it's unrealistic expectations. So I hope that it can get as close as possible with it's okay to remove those details because there's some details where it can kind of bog down a movie, and that makes sense. We don't need all those minute details, so I'm cool with that. But the thing that bothers me the most though is when they completely change things for no apparent reason or add scenes because they think it adds to the movie, and I'm like, you just made the length longer and it was completely irrelevant to add this awkward scene. Like, why is this here? So
Do you have any examples?
oh, that Harry Potter dancing scene.
I
Oh,
like the Harry Potter dancing scene.
when you first said that, I immediately thought the Yule Ball, and I was like, wait, wasn't that in the book? But you're talking Deathly Hallows Part 1 with
Yes,
Harry and
that whole
Hermione in the
movie
tent.
is not necessary sometimes.
I thought
It's
it was a
just
very
gets
sweet scene and helped show like that Harry understood what Hermione was going through and just really wanted her to try to be happier, but she let herself be for a second, but she just couldn't.
Yeah, I think
it was too much for her.
I think that scene's also kind of a good example of the problem with book to film adaptations, because in a book, a lot of your context is coming through characters' thought or just narrator describing what's happening and the emotional resonance. Where the film, if it's not visualized in a certain way or the characters aren't doing something in a certain way, it's hard for the audience to understand what's actually happening, unless it's more for people who haven't read the book. You know what I'm saying? Because people read the book and then watch the film, it's kind of just like a companion piece, because you already know all the world building and the lore and all the stuff in between the lines. For people coming in who do not read and just wanting to watch that film, they may not understand a lot of the nuances that are going on unless they are shown visually. Now, that's not defending that scene or whatever. I'm just saying, like, that's kind of a core example of why adaptations are so hard, because the film crew, the director, and all that stuff, they have to figure out a way to visualize a lot of the subtext that you get in a book that's
yeah,
more
it definitely
prevalent.
is a challenge. But yeah, no, but yeah, I'm like, no, I will still stand my ground on that scene because there's just other scenes if you want to talk about the Harry Potter series later on where the main trio just looks at each other awkwardly and laughs. Like, how is that characterization? How does that add anything? Why do we need this awkward 30 plus second scene, maybe minute long scene of them just laughing unnecessarily. There, I said it. There.
I usually, for that conversation, I usually look at the scene in The Half-Blood Prince where they're like home for Christmas and then the Death Eaters attack the burrow. I hold that scene in my head all the time on like how flexible are you with book to film adaptations. I'm like, okay, tell me, I'll ask somebody, how did you feel about that scene? And a lot of times I get like, it was completely unnecessary. It didn't happen in the book. They didn't have to do that. It makes no sense. And I'm like, okay, like I get you. I use that scene. I'm like, all I need to know is hear your opinion on that scene to kind of like know where you sit.
Yeah, I feel
in this
like
whole conversation.
It's also I feel like no one has a like a Rosetta Stone for grading film adaptations. I think it's very much a sliding.
Right.
I think it's very much a sliding
So
scale.
true.
It's just like,
Just everybody's opinion.
well, it's that, and it's also like how much you have in stake with a certain IP. You know, something like a Harry Potter for you, Chelsea. You know, it's like one of your favorite fictional universes, so you're already going to hold it to a higher standard, right? As opposed to something that either you've never read or don't really care about. In those regards, you're just like, well, was it a good movie? You know, I don't really care about the adaptation because I just wanted a good film. Maybe I've never even read the book, but when you're adapting Harry Potter, by God, you better do it the way I want it, because I've read this book 37 times and I have, you know, certain criteria that you have to meet, you know. So I think there's a sliding scale for everyone on what they choose to like nitpick and what they choose to kind of just like brush off, and that's kind of what makes book to film adaptations like an interesting topic, because there is no like wrong or right answer. It's very subjective. Like what was done well, what was done poorly, and it's more just kind of like the eye of the beholder, like all art. Right? Like for me, I don't like you guys said, I don't look for a 1-to-1 adaptation, because I just don't think it's not necessarily possible, but I just don't think it's very fair to the film to have to set itself in such strict barriers. Like it's for them, like they're also creatives, so they like to try and figure out a way to yes, we're going to adapt this material to the best of our ability to make it, you know, a good adaptation, but we also want to have a creative outlet of our own, you know, so we have to figure out ways for us to enjoy the process. And I think a good example of that, most people, this is also from Harry Potter, most people don't like it, is how Voldemort died. In the films, it was this big cinematic, you know, showpiece of him disintegrating into whatever and floating away, and you know, it's this big visual set piece. You know, because they kind of did the same thing for all the other Horcruxes. There were these like huge, special like visual effects moments when these Horcruxes got destroyed. So this is like the end of this huge series. We gotta make it go out with a bang. You know, or in the book, it's just like Voldemort he's just a dude, just dies. You know, body hits the ground, it's over.
Yep.
Now,
Falls down dead.
Now there's a lot of debate on the symbolism of that, where it's just like, you know, we wanted to show like in the book that Voldemort's just a dude. You know, he's not some god, he's not some like supervillain. He's just like croaks, right? But the film, they're like, we want to send this off on like a high note. We got to cap this series off with some big cinematic set piece. So let's, you know, crank it up to 11. Now, who's to say you know, if it's right or wrong or whatever? Most people, from what I've seen, most people don't like it. But, you know, I don't mind it. It's like they're trying to find a way to, you know, to do their thing on the film side to make it seem a little bit of their own. You know, they got to put a little bit of their own artist stamp on it as well. Because otherwise, like, what's the point of even adapting this stuff you know, from a creative standpoint, if you can't have a little bit of creative freedom with it, I guess. Um, my big thing with book to film adaptations is keeping keeping the overall story arc the same, the major themes the same, like all the top of the funnel stuff I think needs to be the same, and then all the minutia of how, I guess, isn't as important to me. A good example is Lord of the Rings. Um, in terms of one-to-one adaptations, like Lord of the Rings is not a good adaptation because so much is different. Where characters are, where they go, who they meet. Some characters aren't even in it. Some characters are talking to people that they don't actually talk to in the books. Yada yada yada. The film still, or the film series still manages to hit all those like story beats that actually matter, and kind of just like do away with all the world building lore kind of fluff that doesn't. And at the end of the day, it still captures and tells and shows everything that I think it needed to be a successful adaptation. And for me, that's kind of what I'm looking for. Especially with a series like Lord of the Rings, like there's so much there's so much nonsense fluff in that book that people already complain those films are too long, but could you imagine another like 6 hours tacked on so they can run around with Tom Bombadil in the woods and listen to 30 songs and
I've been thinking
I mean?
about Tom Bombadil this whole time.
Yeah, like and Lady Grey and all this other shit. Like films are consumed differently than books. Books aren't usually taken all at once. Most people don't sit down and just read a whole book in one go. Now, I know people do. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying, for the most part, that's not really how people consume books. But when you watch a movie, you're going to the theater and you're watching this thing in one moment, right? So, the editing and the pacing and all that stuff there's certain ways to do that to keep people engaged. It's not really conducive to a one-to-one adaptation from the book, if that makes sense. You guys agree?
Mm-hmm. I do. Chelsea's thinking.
Yeah, Chelsea's still thinking. That's a lot.
Like, yeah, sure.
Chelsea, do you have an example of
Competing.
of an adaptation that took some creative liberties, but also still ended up being like good, like a good movie, even if it was like a bad adaptation? Like
Yeah,
some that didn't
I have a
bother
couple
you.
of those. Yeah. Well, and interesting enough, I think kind of related to that is that there have definitely been a lot of adaptations where I've watched the movie first and then been interested enough to read the book.
Yeah.
And so one of those in particular that fits that criteria is actually Howl's Moving Castle. And so that book is very different from the film. I really like the book. I read that afterwards, but I mean, that movie, it makes it its own. It's very enjoyable, very memorable characters, and I enjoy what they do with the story. And I think it fits really well without adding a lot of the extra details and changes from the books.
Yeah. I didn't know that was a book, so see, there you go. Just like I talked at the top of the episode, like there's some stuff out there that you don't even know. I had no idea that was a book. I still haven't seen the film, so
yeah. Well, definitely check it out. And it's actually kind of part of a series. Some of the characters are in like multiple books, but that's like the main one where a lot of them are in. And then another book, the movie is not necessarily like really good, but I enjoyed it when I was younger when it came out. Ella Enchanted.
okay.
I mean, Anne Hathaway made that film. Like, that's one of those things where like you have really good people in the film that are acting in it and just make their character their own. And you get her singing, just her. She's just, I think I always like her, like in any movie she's in, so it worked, even though I was like, oh, this is very different from the book in certain parts. I'm like, oh boy. But you know.
Yeah, I haven't seen that either. So I keep thinking, what's the one with Amy Adams? I get those two confused.
That's
Oh,
Enchanted.
Enchanted. Yeah.
Enchanted. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure aren't they doing a sequel to that? This is like
Yes.
Disenchanted or something. I don't know. I feel like Disney
Yeah.
Plus is literally just making a sequel to anything that they had on TV at one point. So, have you guys ever come across a film that was like where the film was better than the book?
Ooh. Okay, so sort of, kind of. If you ever seen The Perks of Being a Wallflower,
I've seen the movie, but I haven't read the book.
so I watched the movie and then and I got interested and I read the book. And while really the movie is very, very similar, like
Yeah.
really it's pretty damn close. But you don't get to be inside the main character's head in the movie. And really, like, the movie's a lot about, or the whole series, the whole thing is about, like, mental illness to a degree.
Yeah.
And in the movie, you don't really, you don't get what's happening in his head through a lot of it. Like, the struggles and the pain that he's going through as he's moving through his, like, freshman year of high school or whatever it is. So, reading the book, it almost feels like a completely different thing, even though, like, the story elements are pretty much the same thing.
Right.
But I still think the movie is more enjoyable because the book is very, like, it's like you watch the movie but you have this huge layer of, like, awfulness on top of it. It's good. It's healthy. It's a healthy book to, like, for people to read.
Right.
But it is very, very deep and, like, wow,
Yeah.
to read the book.
Yeah, I can see that. Chelsea, what about you?
Oh gosh, this is hard for me to think about because I'm just like, not that it's hard because all adaptations are terrible or something. It's just like,
Right.
There's so many out there too, and I'm like trying to remember, like, did I actually read that book before I saw the movie or vice versa? So,
How about James and the Giant Peach?
Once
man,
again,
it's
I've
been
seen
such
the
a long
movie, but I
time.
haven't read the. I haven't read the book.
You dodged a bullet.
Isn't that's a Roald Dahl, isn't it? Is that his name?
Yes? Question mark.
Thanks.
I think
Yes.
so.
I'm pretty sure
Yes, I
Netflix just
believe
like
so.
bought the rights to his entire like catalog.
Oh, interesting.
Like I'm pretty sure they like own his estate or whatever.
Yeah, there's something about that. I remember reading about that.
So I'm sure we'll get some live action nonsense from Netflix for that particular series down the road.
Yeah.
I have one that's it's a graphic novel. But I actually think that I read the graphic novel first and then watched the film, and I'm sure that this is like sort of a controversial or take or a hot take, but I think the film's better. And that's Watchmen.
I was wondering.
Okay.
Mostly because I think the ending in the film makes more sense to the world that's constructed more than the ending in the graphic novel. The ending in the graphic novel is essentially, they basically spawn in these aliens all over the world that destroy major cities, and then the world has to band together because they think that these aliens are going to destroy the world. So it creates like this global unifying peace, right? In the film, it's a hoax from Ozymandias that makes it look like Dr. Manhattan went crazy with his god powers and started just wiping out major cities, which in turn led to his exile. Right, that's why he left Earth, and then all the major, nations or whatever banded together in defense in case Dr. Manhattan ever comes back. to me, that makes more sense because it explains why Dr. Manhattan leaves. Where in the book, he just leaves because he's just like, yeah, humans are shit, and I don't really understand. I'm bigger than you, and I don't understand you anymore. You're like ants to me, so I'm just gonna go float through the cosmos. And then he's like, well, maybe I'll create my own life, which is like when you just said life is shit. So I don't know why you're creating more, but whatever. Where in the film, it's like, oh, the entire world now thinks I'm a villain, so I should probably get the fuck out of here. So even though you're not really a threat to me, but now I'm literally enemy number one, so I'm just gonna leave. To me, that makes that's kind of like as a kind of like ties a bow over the whole, like all the characters and where they are, and like the epilogue. It makes more sense to me over the random like alien invasion subplot thing. Even though I thoroughly enjoy the Watchmen graphic novel. I've read it several times. I think it's one of my favorite graphic novels, and I actually really like the film. It's obviously not a 1-to-1 adaptation because the whole ending's different, but they literally probably just took the pains from that series and just made scenes because you can like follow along in the book and the same shit's happening on screen. It's pretty incredible. So it's one of my favorite adaptations, but it's also one of my favorite like alterations, I guess. Where I think the film is actually more successful, especially if you watch the like super duper director extended, like 4-hour cut or whatever. It's like every Snyder film. It's like every Snyder film has like, he's like, oh, here's my director's cut where we just didn't do any editing at all, and all the film's in it. It's 5 hours long. I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff. I love it, especially when it's well done, and a lot of his director's cuts are usually really well done. So, but yeah, Chelsea, you have an example of a film that's better than
sorry.
No,
for some reason I can't think of any, but no, I did like the Watchmen film. I do agree that it's really good. I just didn't immediately come to mind to think about. I just always saw it as like, oh, the graphic novel is, it is like it's well done, and then I'm like, oh, the movie's well done, even though they're different. I just accepted
and they're
that.
different for like, it's like the last 10 minutes is different. Otherwise, it's literally like, it's literally like.
But it flows really well. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah,
like it works really well in the film.
Yeah.
I have one. A movie that I'd rather just watch than read. The Hunger Games movies.
Well, I guess I can't say I'm 100% with you because not only have I not finished that book series, but I haven't finished that film series.
Oh,
and I stopped basically at the exact same point.
The first film's good. I do like the first film.
Well, like with all of the films versus all of the books, like I love the books and I like the movies a lot. Like they followed everything pretty routinely as far as like the plot goes.
Yeah.
But I think one of the strengths that the movies have, two things that the movies have that the book doesn't. One, in the movies you are not in Katniss's head the whole time, which is fine because she's not much of a thinker. She's a doer. That's
literally the worst part about the books, is you are in her head.
Yeah.
And it's like,
she just like everything she thinks she just does, like, because that's just the person she is.
Yeah.
So you're not really missing out on anything, but also the movies do not just follow Katniss around. You get to see what's happening out in the world around the Capitol with the other characters at the same time as Katniss, which I love because they actually brought the author of the book in to help flesh out all of these extra places and people and stuff, which when you're reading versus watching this series, that goes a really long way.
Oh, for sure.
Because like outside of the Hunger Games, it's like politics and relationships, and in the books, like all those things are affecting her within the game, but you don't know why. You're just like, oh,
yeah, it's
they
all
made that happen. That's cool.
In the book, it's a lot of characters in her inner circle, like speculating why things are happening, or it's like alluded to because no one really knows. And in the films, it's like, well, we have to show the other side, otherwise it's just like this weird shadowy entity that the audience has no idea like who they are, what they're doing, and
Right.
why.
They're like throwing out names, and you're like, I already forgot who that person was. Can you at
Yeah,
least show me?
exactly.
Oh, you
So you
did.
got-
Oh, I got to watch them do the thing. Oh, cool. Okay, cool.
Yeah, yeah. They actually like doing that in the film. Actually establishing the villains is, is kind of important for a film. So
One day, I hope that they make a movie of the prequel book that she released. One day. It doesn't have to be anytime
I've
soon.
yet to read that.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's actually really, really good. I picked it up just on a whim because I have the other ones, but I finished it in like 2 days, and it's bigger than the other books. But I was like, oh damn, okay. Like it explains so much of like why the president is the way he is, and like why he does things in such a way. And like it's not a happy ending kind of book either, which is fine because the main series is also not a happy ending book. So
I think part of the reason why I also enjoyed the films is just because I think they really nailed the casting for especially a lot of the like adult characters. Like it's some of my like, I really like Woody Harrelson. I really like Philip Seymour Hoffman. I really like Donald Sutherland. Like Stanley Tucci did a really good job as like the weird, over the top
Stanley Tucci.
Like I think the casting kind of like carried me through because I stopped reading the series about halfway through. What's the third book called? Mockingjay? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I got like halfway through that book and I kind of just gave up. And same with the films. I got halfway through Mockingjay Part 1 and I was just like, I don't care anymore.
Well, like that's another reason, like good reason why they casted so well outside of Katniss, because like again they have so much personality because Katniss doesn't have any.
Yeah, for
Like
sure.
she's just not that person. That's just not who she is. She's not the hero character, She's like, I just want to live my life and away from everybody else and everything.
Her character
And
is
everybody else
boring
is like
to me as Bella was and like all the Twilight shit. It's like the same kind of person.
Oh, don't compare those two.
Well, Katniss is still a good character though. But Bella is like
They're both
What
just
character? No.
they're both just so boring to me. Like, and then like the forced like love triangle aspect of the whole series was also just like I didn't give a shit at all. It just seems small potatoes.
You mean in Hunger Games?
Yeah. Well, in both.
Oh, well that gets well.
both
Okay, that's fair. The Hunger Games one gets taken care of awfully quickly. So
Yeah.
Well, yeah, sure.
yeah, I thought that love triangle is more compelling than the Twilight one. I mean, and I still think like I say that, and there's still like an obvious choice in like who Katniss should be with, but like it's much better, I think. I don't know. Better is not the right word, but
stuff like that when there's just like so much like higher stakes. It's like if Frodo had like a love triangle while he's also trying to destroy the One Ring. It's just like we don't need it. Can we just?
I mean, he kind of did though.
No, he didn't. No.
I mean, there was Samwise and the Ring, so I'm just saying.
I did actually think of a film I liked better than the book. I did think of one.
Does it start with an E?
I like the film better?
Oh, you
no,
like
the
Aragon
film
better than the book?
No. This is a classic book that
Yeah, it starts with an
I
E.
like the movie better. No, The Grapes of Wrath.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I haven't seen
'cause
or watched it, so there you go.
Yeah, so that was one of the books I had to read in high school, and it was a struggle to get through. It just was not compelling to me. It just was so boring. I was glad when it was over. And then a couple years ago, I watched the film, and I went into it thinking I was going to hate it because I did not like the book. I was very pleasantly surprised. Like, I think it was maybe it's just because I'm older since when I read the book, or something, but I just thought all the characters were way more compelling. It was a well done movie in general. Like, it was good acting, and I was just like, I'm invested in these characters. I'm like, what did I miss out when I was reading the book? Apparently, I just need to watch the movie.
I think film also has the ability to do what the author won't, and that's edit. It's like a lot of stuff in books kind of goes on, especially a lot of classic read, where it's just like I feel like
Turtle.
we've been describing the same thing for about 30 pages, and now I've kind of forgotten what the story was.
Yeah,
where
Tolkien.
where a film is like, hey, I'm just gonna have this shot of this thing, and now you know what it is, and we're gonna move on, you know. And it makes the experience more enjoyable because you just focus on the plot, you know, point A to B, you know what I mean? Where in a book, you're just like, I'm bored now because I don't know what's going on, so I'll come back to this in like a month. So, and that's kind of like, you know, a lot of the benefits with, you know, adapting these things into a visual medium, because authors will spend forever describing something that a director can show in a second. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that sometimes the director does a poor job, and it's just like, oh, this is not what I was expecting. Do you guys have any examples of just like straight up bad adaptations you just think are just they have zero worth? They're just like a fail.
Well, I know we've already mentioned in a previous episode of our podcast. We already went on a whole thing about Aragon.
Say it, yes.
So.
Yeah.
Aragon.
Rip it to shreds.
Yeah, no, I don't want to rip it anymore. It's done. I am tired of that. I don't even want to talk about that movie.
It's already dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I mean, there is another one. I wouldn't say it has absolutely zero worth, but it was painful to watch.
Okay.
And it came from such a well done, very well, like, just well written, creative work. Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is. I would say it has no worth because that's just a bad movie. Like, it's like, even if you don't even read the book, it's like, nah, this is just a bad film. Like,
there's
it looks like shit.
You know,
the acting is shit.
I mean, it could almost be a good B movie if you changed it was about, like, who it was about. Like, if it wasn't Abraham Lincoln, I could be like, oh, this was just like a insane movie. This was just, you know, a wild ride. But
that movie's like the kind of thing that they play on like Sci-Fi Channel on like a Saturday morning, like after like Sharknado versus the volcano or whatever. Like, it's like one of those. Like, it has that kind of production quality.
But you know what's so sad about that film too is that the author of the book wrote the script.
Oh, I know. Which is
and
yeah,
it's
almost like he wanted.
Changes.
It's like he wanted to like sabotage it. He's like, "How dare you adapt my film? I'll write it and I'll make it so shitty no one will ever adapt any of my stuff."
It was so sad reading his interviews when he's like, "We're gonna make it very, you know, dark, edgy," and I'm just like, "Is that what happened?" Because that's not what I watched.
They tried to make it into like this like action movie.
Which,
and like the book is not that at all.
The
book is like a slow burn, like history lesson / like
freaking amazing
horror like noir. Like, the book's fucking awesome. Like, if you haven't read that book, I highly recommend go out and read it. It's very short and it's very good. He does a really good job taking like factual history and twisting it, but making it seem like it's still factual. Like, it's fucking brilliant.
Yes, it's amazing because you'll even look up stuff about Lincoln and you're like, oh yeah, no, that actually happened, just obviously not the vampire portion of it.
Yeah, it's really good. It's really well done.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the movie isn't without its charm. But I think the adaptation of Ready Player One, the Spielberg film, was not at all good
Oh,
to the book.
yes. I blocked that out.
And I get why some of the decisions were made, because the book is a lot of nostalgia for like 80s, and they made the film more like present for like what people like now, which I get for market share and trying to get as many eyes on it as possible. That all makes sense to me. But one of the main reasons why I liked Ready Player One was because of that kind of like old 80s nostalgia. And then when I watch the movie and I see just like, Overwatch characters out there, I'm just like, what the fuck am I watching? Like, am I watching a trailer for Fortnite? Like, what is this?
So bad.
And they like completely changed like how characters meet and interact. Like the whole love interest in the story, like all that's completely changed on how all that, like, so much of it was just like, some of the reasons why I really like the book, they completely omitted or changed in like the worst way possible for the film, and just tried to make like this really zany, over the top, metaverse IP
Visuals. Yeah.
visual vomit of a film.
Yeah.
And that's what you got. And it has
That's
like
why you
some
got
of
that racing scene.
yeah, exactly. It's definitely got like some Spielberg charm in there with like the the set pieces, because they do flow very well. It's just everything else is just like, ugh, this is not great. And it's not like the book is like some fucking masterpiece, because it's not. It's just, it's a good read. It's a good fun read, but the film is not a good fun watch, I guess.
No,
So,
it's a train wreck.
yeah. Well, before we get out of here, do you guys have any like personal favorites? Whoever wants to go first.
I mean, I'm trying to think of something that we haven't talked about already.
I'll go for it. I'll say one. It's not, it's a joy to watch. We already talked about how Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter was bad, but he also wrote another book, and that movie was just a blast because it didn't take itself too seriously and it knew what it was doing, and that was Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. It's just it's a fun time. And I mean, you have Lily James in there, just like so many other famous people in that movie, and they're just having a fun time enjoying themselves in that, Jane Austen era style, but also kicking butt, killing zombies.
Yeah, I still haven't seen it or read the book. I always wanted to read the novel first. I just never really got around to it.
Yeah, definitely worth it, but everybody should definitely read the
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln first.
Yeah, for sure. Wade, you have any others?
Does the Princess Bride count?
I guess, yeah.
I mean,
guess.
I'll go there. I'll say that. on closing, I'll say that.
Yeah, I've never read the book, but it's a good film.
It's a fun one.
I have one that's kind of a cheat, because it's only half of a book so far. But
Oh yes, we know what this is.
yeah, but so far so good. They've done a really admirable job with Dune, the new one, not the David Lynch one or whatever. Which that one has its charms as well, but the new one is very well done. If you like that book series, and I'm very excited to see them continue on with that world and that universe, because it's a pretty fucking good 1-to-1 so far. Now granted, they only had to do half of the first book, and they're not doing the entire series for reasons I won't spoil. It doesn't really make sense to do the whole series. They're only going to do the first 2 books. That's kind of really all you need to do, but yeah, haven't read the book twice now. Yeah, it was kind of everything I wanted it to be and kind of hoped for, and probably then some. I truly enjoyed it. So keep doing a good job there, Denny, because you're fucking killing it. And hopefully you get your Oscar next time. So anything else? You guys have any others you want to throw out there? Nope.
I don't think so.
All right, Chelsea.
But there's definitely,
there's hundreds.
There's so many.
There's literal.
And I'm
hundreds.
sure we missed some, but listeners, you can let us know which ones we missed and which ones are your favorites. So I think that'll do it for this week's episode of our podcast. Thanks everybody for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast and share it with a friend. That'd be cool too. Also, you can leave us a review. Hopefully you'd give us 5 stars or just let us know what you want to see us do next on the podcast. You can also follow us on our social media at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at PodDemastered. You can also feel free to send us an email at demasteredpodcast@gmail.com. We also have a Discord. You can check that out as well. We have a link to our Discord on our episode, in our episode show notes, and you can also find those links on our social media as well. And again, thanks you guys for listening, and we hope you tune in next week. See ya.
See ya.